on the current issue. And I actually gave a presentation last year on the current issue. And I talked about water resources management and how it was an economic issue and how it was a matter of supply and demand. And that presentation has been available to everybody who was doing Envirothon last year. So I didn't want to duplicate it. So I'm assuming that all of you can have that and got it and had probably looked at it in the past. If not, these guys have it, so you can look at it again. But anyway, I wanted to take it to another step because I'd already presented that, and thinking you guys had seen it before, it's like, well, I better do something new. So I put something new together for you today, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So because last time I talked about some of the issues and things, I decided this time I would go further and I would talk about some of the local solutions, which I find really fascinating, and share some of them with you. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of these, especially if they're in your region. Those of you who are up in North Texas are probably familiar with one of the sites I'm going to show you. But one of the things I think are interesting about all of these is the scale of them, because these are being developed by very large scale projects developed by large urban areas to deal with problems well into the future. Last year, again, we talked about the economics of water a little bit, and the fact that it's really a supply and a demand issue. And although, the United Nations has said that they've put out a resolution that access to water is a human right, the market treats water as a commodity, and it's bought and it's sold between organizations, between communities and private entities, and of course between producers and consumers. And then sometimes it's actually bought and sold some more after the consumers use it, and it goes out for treatment, and it becomes a new resource that gets bought and sold again as reused water, and sometimes just as being reused as, in fact, many times being reused as drinking water. So water is this kind of cyclic commodity that has this long-term economic component to it. And of course, here in Texas, as all over the world, that the economics of water is mediated by environmental and social externalities. And so we're affected by climate change. We're affected by the migration of human populations, and thus the demand changes. We're affected by weather, and we're affected by human pollution on those water resources we do have. And this is true internationally. It's true here in the United States, and of course it's true here in Texas. So we have all these factors that are playing into how we manage water. But bottom line is, they ain't making any more of that. And so we're trying to figure out ways to do better things with what we have. And in order to do that, I wanted to look at some big projects that we have here in Texas that illustrate some of the mechanisms that my other presentation talks about redeveloping water, or, well, we'll just look at them and I'll show you some of them. So the first one I wanted to talk to you all about is the LUCE BAYOU INTERBASIN Transfer Project. This is an enormous project. It is a project to move water from one watershed to the other, and it connects the Trinity and San Jacinto River watersheds. The project takes water from the Trinity over to Lake Houston through a series of canals. Lake Houston, for those of you who aren't from Houston, is a reservoir on the San Jacinto River. It's one of the primary sources for drinking water in the city of Houston, particularly for the north side. And this project is capable of transferring 500 million gallons per day, which is a lot of water. The water comes out of Lake Houston then to the Northeast Water Purification Plant, and we'll talk about that for a minute too. But the goal really is to maintain the supply for the city of Houston into the future, and specifically to reduce our reliance on groundwater, because we live in a very subsidence-prone region here in South Texas. We're all sediment. We have what we call hydrocompactive soils here. So when you pull the groundwater off, the surface of the ground sinks. And in parts of Houston, especially down here in the south and over on the other side of, and over next to Galveston Bay, there are areas that have sunk 10 to 16 feet due to groundwater use. So we're trying to reduce that, and the city has a goal of reducing its groundwater use to about 15% of its total water supply in the next 15 years. So this project is part of that. So I'm going to take us out here, and this is the photo gallery that shows us what this looks like. It's actually a website called Reduce Flooding Now, but what they have here are some incredible photographs of what this project looks like. And so this project, I believe, has been completed. These photos were taken in December of 2019. And these pictures start at Lake Houston, which is the end of the project, and then they go back towards the Trinity River. So what you see here in this first photo, this is Lake Houston out in the distance. And this is the transfer point right here. This is actually LUCE Bayou. And originally they thought that they were going to try to use LUCE Bayou as a primary conveyance, but then it was determined that wasn't really a good idea. So instead they used the last few hundred yards of LUCE Bayou here to take it out to Lake Houston, and the rest of it is all canals. So you can see the canal here. Again, looking off to Lake Houston to the southwest. As I scroll up, this is what the water looks like as it comes out of the canal. The water, it comes out pretty quickly, and then we have sediment settling in here. So sedimentation in this area is a bit of a problem. They do actually have sedimentation ponds and desedimentation filtration for the water as it comes out of the Trinity, but it still brings some sediment, and it's picking some up along the way, which it really shouldn't be doing. But this was the construction phase, so that may be the reason it picked up so much sediment. This is a view of the canals themselves. They have these big drainage swales alongside of them. Again, this is where it's coming out into LUCE Bayou. So this is the end of it at Lake Houston. You can see some of the detail. We've got riprap in the outfall structure here coming into LUCE Bayou so that it doesn't erode away the basin. You can see there's not very much water in it in this area right here. The water's back up upstream a little bit. So you can see it here. And it's a gravity-driven system. So the water is pumped up at Trinity, and then it just drains downhill all the way to Lake Houston. It's very small. It's only a 0.015% slope, but that's enough to keep the water moving. And they didn't want it to move too fast because they don't want it to be causing erosion problems along the way. Very interesting project. There are a number of different kinds of weirs built along it, and what we call upside down siphons, which move, inverted siphons, which help the water move through the system. There are 22 of them. There are roads and pipelines and 11 bridges that cross this system. I like this picture here, which says these aren't the smallest pipes. You can put a pickup truck in any one of them, so they're very, very large. And then now you get a chance to see what it looks like in the other parts of town. So that's moving through the farmlands here over near Huffman. Again, you can see it's just this long open canal. When you can see there are crossings and things here. One of the things that they did when they built this was actually put other stream and bayou crossings over the top of it rather than underneath it or something. So we'll see some of those here that show that there are ditches and things that actually go right across the top of the project. The water here again has been gone through a sediment basin, so that's why it's so blue. And more photos of it here. It's just kind of it's an incredible feat of engineering, if you ask me. So here's another one. Here's an example of a stream crossing over the top right here. So it just literally got the streams coming in here. It passes over an area. The water is actually passing underneath, and the canal goes underneath. The natural waterway goes over the top. That's common, fairly long. There's a bridge here. Another example of putting a stream over the top of the canal. In this case, they're still doing some construction. You see the highway right here. The highway is going over the top of it as well. So it's going under the highway. It took 3 million cubic yards of soil to remove it, as this little blurb here says, and so it's an immense project, and it is an interbasin transfer, and that is a really interesting issue, if you ask me, because you're taking one river system's water and moving it over to another one. That has to have impacts on that watershed, and I think this is a really interesting conversation that we can have with our students about what that means when you take water out of one watershed and you transfer it to a different place. Essentially, you affect everything downstream of that transfer point in the Trinity. So, what does that mean? How serious is that? Again, we're not making any more water. The LUCE Bayou project is really an example of just taking it from one place where there seems to, the city of Houston basically has rights on the Trinity. This was a way for them to use those water rights. We talk a little bit, in my last presentation, I talked a little about water law and basin allocation. In most basins in the United States, most water is over allocated in basins because we don't have a really good way of measuring how much water is actually available in them. And we can certainly measure what's available from surface water in terms of flows, but in terms of groundwater resources, it's never clear how much really is there. And so they tend to be over allocated. I find this a very interesting project. I just wonder what its impacts are going to be further on down the road when we move forward and in the future. Again, because all of this, it's the same amount of water. We're just moving it around. We're not making any new water here. Part of that same project is expanding the Northeast water purification plant here in Houston. That plant currently treats 80 million gallons a day. This expansion is going to add 320 million additional gallons for a total of 400 million gallon a day treatment capacity. And that pairs up with the LUCE BAYOU project, which is providing 500 million gallons a day. We didn't have a water treatment plant that could do that, and so we have a project here that will do that. So here we take you to the Northeast water plant. You can see they're still actually having meetings and discussions about it. So this isn't finished yet. This is currently in progress. But the plant expansion is scheduled. Well, they're working on building it right now. So let me see if I can scroll down and actually show it to you. Yeah, here's a photograph of what it's going to look like. So it's built right next to the current plant. And as I said, the current plant's only an 80 million gallon facility. This is going to be an enormous 320 million gallon facility doing purification. And so this website here is one that you can use to learn more about it. As you see, this is the goal right here, that by 2025, 60% of the Houston's water has to be surface water, and then it needs to increase to 80% by 2035. And so that's that long-term goal. And so this plant allows more of that water that's being brought over through LUCE BAYOU to be treated and provided to the northern communities in the city of Houston. So it involves both an expansion of the plant. There's a big pipeline that's going to take it from Lake Houston to the plant. And then there's a new pump station that's being built in Lake Houston that will pump that extra water that's coming from LUCE BAYOU down into the pipeline and then over to the plant for Northeast Houston. One comment I also wanted to make here is that Lake Houston has had issues in recent years because of drought with lake levels, and so the people on Lake Houston are not necessarily all that happy about this issue as well. They're not quite sure what this is going to look like in terms of their water availability for their lake, for their boats, for their homes, for their recreation, because they bought property on Lake Houston assuming they would have a lake there. The other thing that's interesting to me is that they opted to do an open canal for LUCE BAYOU. We have high evaporation rates here because it's so hot in the summer. It's pretty humid too, but we still have high evaporation rates because of the strength of the sun. And so I'm curious as to what the evaporation rate and the evaporative losses are from that project, because they're probably pretty big. So just some information then on the plant that's going to take that water from the LUCE BAYOU project and bring it over to us. So another really interesting project, and this one is in Northeast Texas, and I guess some of you guys who are from up that way may be quite familiar with this one. This is a project up on the East Fork of the Trinity River, and I just love this project. This is a reuse project. So in this case, we may not be making any more water, but we're learning how to reuse what we've got more effectively, and I love that a lot. The North Texas Municipal Water District developed this project. And that district involves the cities, a whole bunch of cities: Farmersville, Forney, Garland, McKinney, Mesquite, Princeton, Plano, Rockwall, Royce City, Wiley, Richardson, Allen, and Frisco. So a lot of these smaller cities up in that area are part of this water authority, which built this project. And they built 1,840 acres of wetlands and canals, which to me is just an astonishing size of a project. The treated wastewater that goes into the system travels 44 miles through those wetlands until it arrives at Lavon Lake. And at Lavon Lake, then that is the source for the Wiley water treatment plant, where they take this water and then it goes to that water treatment plant to be used as drinking water. So this is actually wastewater. This is a wastewater treatment project. The wastewater is coming out of the district's wastewater treatment plant. It's going into this massive wetlands project, and then it's coming out in a condition where it can then be treated and used again. So I'm going to show you some pictures here because, again, it's extraordinary. This little video is on actually the Texas Living Waters Project website, but I wanted to show it to you in case you've never seen this from the air, because it's just phenomenal. And these canals stretch on for miles. It's just enormous. So it is very impressive project. There isn't actually any more on this page, so I'm going to go back here and go to the there's a great aerial view of it there. And so you can literally see that all of this area in here, this is all part of the project. We have wetlands, we have canals, we have obviously some agriculture that's being used as part of this. It's just an immense project. And some of you guys may know more about it than I do. It's a beautiful project. I also want to just take you down and open the brochure for it, because they've got what I would call multi-use going on here in this project. So they developed the John Bunker Sands Wetland Center as part of the project. That center has an observation deck so people can come and watch birds. They can overlook parts of the project. They can visit the wetland. They have field studies that the families can participate in, educational workshops on how this whole system works, teacher workshops, youth workshops. And I don't know, Wendy, but if we ever get Envirothon up in that area, we really should go see this, because it just seems like it's an extraordinary project, just enormous in size. And then this brochure here just talks about how, you know, the wetlands that's designed to use the natural filtration of the wetlands process. I like their journey of water diagram down here, where basically the treated water is discharged into the river. They divert it and put it into the wetlands. It sits for 24 hours in their settling basins, and then it starts traveling through the wetlands. And so it literally goes through about 44 miles of canals and wetlands until finally it's pumped into a pipeline, heads off to Lavon Lake. It's blended with the lake itself, and then they treat it again and it's reused. So an extraordinary project. I would love to go see this one. So I think it's really interesting. And it is, because it is a reuse project, it's essentially taking water which we, you know, have and again, treating it, reusing it, rather than, but of course the flip side of that is, if it's not coming down the Trinity, it's not feeding freshwater flows for whatever's downstream. And of course, we're, you know, here in Houston, you know, we just put together a project to take 500 million gallons from the Trinity and put it into the San Jacinto. Well, the water that's getting reused here isn't coming down the Trinity to be used by the city of Houston, you know, and it always pays to be upstream when it comes to water. You know, we in Houston have a big problem because we're so far downstream. We're at the bottom of the funnel, and everything, all the waste is coming down to us. And in this case, all the water is getting taken out above us. So a very interesting project for North Texas, but also has its consequences, I'm sure, for those of us who are down here in the South, but still are going to rely on water from the Trinity River. So again, it's that balance between users, supply, it's that supply and demand curve. And again, sometimes when you're close to the source, you can do things and the people downstream don't have a lot to say about it. But again, a beautiful project. I would love to see this one. I imagine it's just gorgeous.
Kathy, I think Tony has some information on this project. He's put in the chat that this is where they do their Envirothon aquatics training, and he just put a couple of other things in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really cool project, and we've gone there probably for the last 6 years or so. So you just mentioned the idea that they do have to allow a certain flow rate to go downstream for their constituents downstream. So if there is a drought situation, then their wetlands may become inactive for a period of time. Which,
wow.
Since they've had that developed, they haven't had that problem yet, because right when they got it done, that's when we kind of came out of that 10-year drought way back in the day and stuff. So the pipes that they go into, I think they're like 8-foot diameter pipes. They're massive, a pipeline at the back end of it. But we'll do water quality testing at the front end of it. As they go from cell to cell to cell, then you do testing to see the different DOs, the pHs, the nitrogen. And then they have specific plants in there, but they do have invasive fish like carp. They got to worry about that flooded in from the Trinity River.
Oh boy.
And it's on average, it's 3 feet deep. So it's all that euphotic, high reactive zone, high productivity to do all that phytoremediation. So it's a really cool project. They got birding trails out there, birding events. And I've actually been working with them to do like a biking along all the levees and dikes and stuff like that. So bike the bunkers, what we were looking at calling it. But that's when COVID also hit too.
Yeah, and everything shut down. Well, I'm glad you've seen it, because I had a question and it wasn't clear to me. I know they said that the water travels 44 miles, but is that 44 miles through the wetlands, or is there a fairly long pipeline from the end of it over to Lavon Lake?
It's a long
because I didn't.
It's a long.
It's all in the wetlands.
halfway uphill and then halfway downhill. So it takes a huge pumping system. We haven't gotten to go see that yet because it's at the far end. But it's a massive system to push all that water. And then luckily the other half is downhill. And it's the idea that we always talked about, you could put those turbines within that pipe system to make energy as it's coming downhill to replace the energy you use to push it uphill.
That would be really smart. Yep.
Well,
you know what we always said in
natural. Sorry,
go
that area
ahead.
a natural wetland initially, or was it something that they made it into a wetland?
They made it into a wetland. It was a farmer, John Bunker's his name, and it was just a perfect condition. And he was always kind of into conservation. There are still some cattle ranches around there, but they maintain the riparian zones. They have multiple levels of buffer zones to maintain the ranching, but also the water quality too. It was a natural flood zone, and he was like, it wasn't being as productive for cattle as it was. So he basically kind of got the idea that I wanted to do something, a legacy, but then I can also take that value that they pay me for some of that land to put back into my property also. So it was kind of a win-win for both of them to do something that was good for his whole community, knowing at that time we had to look way ahead with our water issues and knowing, like you said, Dallas population doubling, within the next 20 years or so. And knowing that water, with our numbers, just like Houston, we're starting to pull water from East Texas and Lake Palestine and all that into the Dallas area now too. So, all these water wars are going beyond counties and eventually beyond state lines, looking into Louisiana, pulling into Texas too.
Well, sure. And when you think about Texas, it goes beyond the national borders too, right? We've been in a water war with Mexico for the last 40 years over the Rio Grande. It's not funny, and it has not. Well, I don't know. I'm sure locally it has come to armed combat at points, but for the moment it's just it's a three-way battle between Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico about who gets that water.
Yeah.
So it's very complicated, and I'm glad I don't work in that area, frankly, because I think it would give me a lot of gray hair.
Like you said, this John Bunker Sand is a great multi-dimensional benefit with education and. They've got grants with Texas Parks and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife to make it a habitat conservation property as well. So it's a really cool location.
Just very cool. Yeah, I think it's just astonishing, just wonderful. And I was thinking, something that can be done in that area. I was thinking, it would be hard to translate this into something we do here. We couldn't do it in Harris County because Harris County is about 95% developed. We wouldn't find 2,000 acres to save your life in Harris County, but some of our outlying counties could very well find that. And especially if you go west of here, if you head over into Matagorda County, counties out on the Brazos, there might very well be the possibility of doing some development work around this kind of a project in that area where you could do water reuse. And certainly we could find that, I think, if we went up to the northeast of the city as well. But like I said, if you look at the Houston-Galveston Area Council region, which is, I think, 11 counties, only in the far reaches do we still have that much land. And again, they tend to be uphill from everything because, the concentration is closer and closer to the sea. So it's lower and lower in the system. But again, this is an amazing project. So I wanted to show everybody who hadn't seen it, this one. Okay, the next one is inland desal. And in this case, I would say that perhaps we actually are making water. Certainly the water is there, but in this case, we're taking a water source that would be otherwise unusable and turning into a usable water source. And again, in my talk last year, I said one of the techniques that we have along with water reuse and interbasin transfer is this idea of using desal. And so the El Paso Water Authority is in charge of this. It's actually a joint venture. And they produce 27 million gallons per day of fresh water from a brackish groundwater resource. They're connected up to the Tularosa Basin as well as some other groundwater basins in New Mexico. And Tularosa is actually an isolated basin. There is no outlet to it. And so the water that comes from there and the groundwater that comes from there tends to be quite brackish anyway. And then because of all the groundwater use that has gone on in both El Paso and southern New Mexico and Mexico, more and more of the groundwater is becoming brackish over time. They're using up the freshwater elements of it and being left with only the brackish groundwater. So having some sort of a plant that can deal with that is really important. The El Paso plant is on the way to being what's called a full recovery plant. They're having a collaboration with another facility, which is built next door, which will use the mineral extract that is taken. This is a reverse osmosis plant. And so, when you do reverse osmosis on water, what you generate is a clean water and a much more salty effluent, if you like. And so that's actually being taken over to a plant next door, and they are working to develop products from that salty liquid that can be sold. So there are different kinds of salts and fertilizers that they're producing. And so the idea is that there would be, eventually there would be no liquid discharge or waste product coming out of this combined system here. You would probably still have some solid waste product, but at least there would be no liquid waste. One of the questions that comes up to me as I look at the size of this facility, because 27 million GPD is a lot of water again, how much energy are they using? And they don't really talk about that. I couldn't really find any data, on short notice on this particular plant in terms of the energy use. But there's been a paper or two out there that says that they could put in a solar facility there that would at least reduce some of their energy demand. But they're certainly using a tremendous amount of electricity to make this plant happen. And so I'll take you over here to this website. So this has been around for a while. This was in 2017. They marked 10 years, so it's actually 23, almost 24 years old now. It is the world's, at least at that time, was the world's largest desal plant. Very big facility. And I'm going to actually play you a little video that comes from El Paso Water. They talk about all the different things that they are doing here. At the 10th anniversary, they actually had a conference on inland desal. And so they invited a lot of people. Back in 2017, they came to talk about all of the different kinds of research that was going on at that time. And so I'm going to play this little video. It's kind of a promotional video for El Paso Water, but it really shows you the plant. It takes you through and shows you the different equipment and gives you a real sense of how big this is, because it's enormous. I'll play that for you and you can get a look at this one. But I want you guys to watch the video, and then we can talk again a little bit about what it means to have such a significant technological input, if you like, a significant technological solution to some of these problems.
Kathy, if I may ask a question while we're waiting for that video.
Sure.
You didn't mention, El Paso is a low rainfall area. So are they making sure that it's sustainable by making sure that the groundwater's refilling up at the same rate as they're extracting water from it? Or is it a non-renewable resource?
That is a great question. And I think that they kind of look at it because it's brackish, that they don't need to worry about that. They're thinking that they're looking at very old water. But bottom line is they're mining groundwater. There's no question. They've been mining groundwater. They're still mining groundwater. They mined all the fresh water. Now they're mining the brackish water that's left. But they're definitely mining groundwater there. And in basically all of West Texas, eastern New Mexico, if you're using groundwater resources from any aquifer in that region, you're mining groundwater because they are far exceeding the recharge rates. No question about that.
Okay. All right. And I had another question about that LUCE or LUCE INTERBASIN. That must be costing a bunch of money. Is there any way, do you happen to know how much the budget is for that?
I don't, but it's got to be huge. Yeah, because they have to pump it, right? It's a pumping station. So they pump it up out of the Trinity, and then it drains down to Houston, but it's,
yeah, even just the initial engineering, all those bridges and overpasses, it must be costing an awful lot of money, or must have cost.
Must have cost a tremendous amount of money. Yeah, and I'm sure if I did a little more research, I could find that. Oh, looks like we've got a video.
2007, the K. Bailey Hutchison desalination plant opened its doors for the first time. It was the result of years of planning, testing, and partnerships to bring a new sustainable water source to El Paso.
We are forced by the environment that we live in to make sure that we are covering all the bases, to make sure that all the pieces of the puzzle are uncovered and put together properly in such a fashion that we can have a viable future for this community. El
Paso Water is celebrating the milestone anniversary of the plant by hosting local, state, and national leaders to discuss the impact of the KBH desalination plant and what it means for the future. The plant remains the largest inland desalination plant in the world, paving the way for other inland communities facing water supply challenges. The reverse osmosis technology uses high pressure to remove salts and other unwanted minerals from otherwise unusable brackish groundwater, transforming it into fresh drinking water.
This is a unique attribute to this community. It sets us apart. It is a part of the story of the innovation here in El Paso that's quite, frankly, we're still an unknown commodity. We're still the jewel in the desert.
During drought and freeze, this plant has produced water when other sources were not available, helping El Paso's resilience. The plant, with its in-house laboratory, has become a magnet for researchers looking to unlock the potential for desalination.
There's been a lot of research done at this plant, and other research has been done. And part of the, those of you that will be attending the research forum this morning will hear more about that, because it's advanced, not only the cooperation among the partners, among the universities, but also for the whole region.
To celebrate the 10-year milestone, university researchers shared a decade of discoveries that will pave the way for wider adoption of desalination.
Our focus of our research is brackish desalination. So what does that mean? I said earlier on the tours, we're trying to make desalination better.
And investigations by the company Envirothon have led to a groundbreaking partnership with El Paso Water that could forever change how the salt concentrate is managed.
So we call that the full recovery desal plant, because basically we want to use everything, kind of like the oil industry, which is my background. We want to use everything from the water that we can.
The new EWM facility will create products to sell from the concentrate and deliver 2 million gallons per day of drinking water back to the utility. Water sector leaders agree EP Water is leading the country with these innovative water supply solutions.
The utility really provides a blueprint for other utilities to follow in the future, particularly as source waters available continue to increase in their scarcity.
Success of the KBH desalination plant and the research completed here will play a role in the future of desalination in Texas, the nation, and across the globe.
So I don't know if you caught that piece of doublespeak that woman gave at the end there. She said it's going to be really valuable as sources of water supply over time increase in their scarcity. It's like, what did you just say? What do you mean? Is water becomes more scarce, right? It's like, really? What a complicated way to say that. But anyway, I think that desal is something that a lot of people view as a strategic technological solution to these kinds of issues. But I mean, the one thing you see, and the one thing that I have in common with these different projects that I showed you today is as Rowena pointed out, the amount of money that it requires to do this sort of enormous project. And so when you have very, very large base of water users who are paying water, who are paying for water, large numbers of industrial users who are paying for water, you can have these, and then government support for more water projects. You can do these sorts of things. But if you're a small community, or if you're a developing country, you don't have these kinds of resources. And so there have to be other strategies that we can think of and that we can develop that help on a smaller, more local, more regional scale, because not everybody's going to have the kinds of resources that it takes to put all of this together. But it is, like I said, these are some of the local solutions when Texas is local. Some of the big solutions that have been found across Texas, and again, I thought you guys would be interested in seeing, how grand some of these plans are for these different regions that really are planning to have big populations far into the future.
2 questions. One thing that isn't mentioned about desal is just how much electricity it uses. Mm-hmm. So there's that impact of that. So I don't know. I just thought about that, because you can't, you might be fixing one thing, but then it depends on where their electricity is coming from. Then the other question I had is a current thing. I'm just curious, because I don't know. That recent attack on a water treatment plant, was it in Florida? We're spending tons of money on all of these infrastructure improvements and LUCE Bay, but I'm just curious. I'm wondering how advanced the actual computer systems in these water treatment plants are, because that's what they said was the reason, was that they were using like some antiquated
It's like the
system.
cyber attack that you're talking.
Yeah. And again, I think that it depends. Water treatment tends to be fairly local. We work. We live here down at UH Clear Lake. Our water goes to there's a water treatment plant about half a mile from here, on the same bayou that we're located on, and it is the thing was built, I think, in about 1969. It's not very high tech. I doubt that they have very complex computer systems. If you go up the road and you go to the Gulf Coast Authority, which manages a huge industrial wastewater treatment plant up about 3 miles from here, and also a great big municipal one over in Friendswood, they've got state-of-the-art everything. They got state-of-the-art everything because they are such a well-funded and well-supported organization. So it just depends on who's doing the treatment, who's doing the work, whether they're trying to work on 20-year-old laptops, or if they have a whole system of really excellent high grade and well-protected technology. If a plant, I'm guessing the plant that's around the corner from us doesn't even have anybody. They probably have one person whose part-time job is to support their computer technology, because they're mostly operators and people who are handling the plant itself. Whereas if you would go to some place like the Gulf Coast Authority, they probably have dedicated, in fact, they do have dedicated computer engineers working on automating everything and then maintaining both the viability and the security of those systems. They are considered a key system in terms of national security. They are water plants and water treatment plants are considered, again, a key vulnerability, and therefore they are known to be a target, and there is support. I believe there is support for them to get at least some technology and securing their technology to some extent, but I don't know how far that ever went.
I had a question about that desalination plant. Are they considered? Did they say anything about subsidence? Is that going to play a role at all?
No, not down in that region, because they're down in rock. They're not in sediment like we are. So their aquifers are
so that won't be a problem for them at all.
No, they don't have a problem with that. But in terms of electricity use, of course, they've got a huge problem with that.
Yeah.
RO is incredibly energy intensive, and the trade-off. There's a plant in I think it's in Perth, Australia, that they wanted to build this big, and it was an ocean desal plant. And the community just balked at the electricity demand for it, and so the company partnered with another company, and they built a wind farm to supply the energy to run the desal plant, and then everybody was happy. So they have offshore wind, and it's providing enough energy to keep the desal plant running, and everybody, they had both salty water and the wind, and they were able to combine those two into a zero energy use, no new energy use, not on the grid, system. But that's what the local people demanded, because they were not willing to have the energy be used for the desal coming out of their standard electricity grid. So I thought that's a really interesting kind of a project in a different part of the world where people stood up. I'm thinking that maybe someplace in Southern California also has a system where they have a desal plant and they're running it off geothermal energy. But I could be completely wrong about that. I know they have geothermal plants over there, but I think I heard about a couple geothermal RO desal system, so that the geothermal energy would run the desal, and they wouldn't have to be using the grid. They would be off the main electricity grid. Somebody posted in the chat and said that the Israelis have a new RO technology that has significantly decreased energy use. The other thing is that because they're in El Paso, they're doing brackish and not full ocean saline. You actually use a lot less energy because you're removing a lot less salt. So it's brackish water is probably a third the salinity of ocean water. So they're not nearly. It doesn't take nearly as much energy to run the system, and that's one of the reasons they can do it, is because they're doing brackish and not full saline.